Jim Carafano is a leading expert in national security and foreign policy. He is also a 25-year Army veteran and now with the Heritage Foundation. He joins us now as a guest. Jim, appreciate your time. President Zelensky wants this no-fly zone. We're hearing a lot about it. The talks intensifying. We're going to talk about the risks of that in a moment. But first, explain what a no-fly zone is and what that would involve.
Well, basically, it's just like it sounds. It's having the capacity to say nobody can fly. Obviously, you can't conduct military operations by air, so that would include everything from airborne operations to reconnaissance to attacks. Now, we should be clear. I mean, this wouldn't affect for drones, for example, which a no-fly zone can't really address. Look, there's one problem is, of course, the U.S. would be a belligerent in the war, and that would bring the United States and Russia into direct conflict. So I think it's a non-starter for NATO from that perspective. It would be very difficult to implement, right, because you're doing this on the fly. And the third thing is this war is not really an air war. It's being fought on the ground. The Russians are fighting with missiles and rockets. None of that's going to be affected by a no-fly zone. And even if the Ukrainians, if they let the Ukrainians fly, they're not going to get air control. And it's a very dense air defense environment. So it's going to be very, very difficult for the Ukrainians really to conduct a sustained air campaign. So I know it sounds good, but it just doesn't really kind of pass the common sense test.
Well, wouldn't the issue also be supplying the Russian military with more supplies that they need in terms of their stalled push to Kyiv right now with that long convoy? I mean, if they're able to still land their planes, they're able to resupply their troops.
Well, they can resupply on the ground. They have control of the ground lines of communication in the country, so that's not really a problem for them. And the Ukrainians they're never going to be able to conduct a sustained air campaign to close those off because the Russians have air defense systems. This war is going to get far out of the ground. Look, way, way more important than a no-fly zone is to be able to get medical supplies and food and water and ammunition and weapons to the Ukrainians. As long as that can go on, the Ukrainians can fight. If that's cut off and there's no way to get those supplies into the country, then it's going to be very, very difficult for the Ukrainians to continue to provide a conventional defense of their country. As a matter of fact, it'll be impossible.
The other thing being discussed, Jim, is sending in warplanes. A number of countries, including the U.S., are in discussion about that. Could this be seen by Moscow as a direct involvement in war? What are the risks or implications of doing so?
Well, it's not. For years, the United States fought in the Vietnam War, and the Russians and the Chinese poured in resources and assets and stuff all the time. Supplying a belligerent is not an act of war. Fighting in a war is an act of war. So if people gave them fighter aircraft, there's really no difference between doing that and giving somebody a Javelin or a Stinger missile. So the questions there are just kind of practical things like, do you have an airfield? Can you fuel it? Can you resupply it? Can you fix it? Do you have pilots that can fly it? If they can work those things out, and the Ukrainians want to conduct defensive air operations in their airspace, I don't see an issue there at all.
But aren't we assuming that Putin is playing by fair rules?
No, I mean, but here's the one rule that I go to sleep at night and I hope holds, which is nuclear powers don't go to war with each other because they know where that can end up. And if Putin attacks NATO territory or NATO forces, he is risking a real war with an enemy that has weapons that dwarf what he can bring to the table, and that's what he has to think about.
I guess as
long as we play by those rules, that's the deterrent.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, could any of these things be seen as a provocation for Putin, who clearly is undeterred by some of the other measures, the sanctions, supplying the Ukrainian military with warplanes or whatever else? He's not deterred by any of this. So at what point does the line get crossed? Does that make sense? Right.
So look. Yeah, absolutely, because one of the problems is we didn't do things to help Ukraine because we were afraid about antagonizing Putin, which is nonsense, because what Putin respects is force. If NATO's willing to defend NATO territory, I think that's a reality he is forced to confront. Everything short of that, I think, is just meaningless. So I do think the ability to demonstrate you're willing to defend your own territory, he has to take that seriously. But I agree. Self-deterring from yourself, this might make Putin mad or aggressive. That's just nonsense. Like, don't give them weapons. Don't give them aircraft because it'll make Putin mad. I mean, that's just ridiculous because he's already demonstrated he doesn't care about any of that stuff. But what he does care about is the survival of his regime. And if he attacks NATO forces in NATO territory, he is directly bringing that and his future into doubt.
Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.